Alright, for today's video, we're going to be discussing a topic that was brought up on our Discord channel, which as always, you'll find an invitation link down below in the description. But the topic was brought up: how do you make strategy games, and more specifically, city builders, from not feeling repetitive over multiple plays or hours of doing the same city? And as the thumbnail for our video will demonstrate, we're going to be spending time talking about the Anno franchise. Now, Anno, if you're not aware of, is a series developed by Blue Byte. They've been going on for now, I think, over 20 to 25 years. And they have become popular in terms of logistics strategy. Note I didn't say city building, because Anno is technically not considered a city builder, even though you spend the majority of your gameplay loop building cities. And yes, I know that makes perfect sense, and we can end this video right here on that, but we should probably go into a little bit more detail. Now, city building design is a fascinating topic. I actually had a chance to speak to Chris Beatrice via email. He was the lead designer on the Impressions city builders. Pharaoh, Caesar, he even also worked on Children of the Nile, and a few other ones that we're going to be talking about later. And the email correspondences we had together could probably be its own mini essay on city building design. But city builders, or the ones that tend to not really do much in the building side of things, are very mechanical in their design. Meaning that it's not so much about you reacting to what's going on. I put down this building, and it will function the same way, do the same things until the end of time, or I delete it. And that's not really a major part of city building. Most city builders will simulate some aspect of a city management or city life. In city skylines, and yes, you're going to be hearing the word city a lot in this video. But in city skylines, its major simulation model was the traffic and basically designing roads and such. In the original SimCity, it was about the interconnection of residential, commercial, and industrial zones. And even if we look at the Impressions era, there is some aspect of simulation going on, even though it's still very abstracted, and that's the Walker system. And if you don't know what that term is, the Walker system refers to how each building would send out an agent, and this agent represents essentially a need or a service from that building. As it walks along your roads, any buildings that it comes into contact with are considered service. So it's not realistic. Again, a market person doesn't just walk around to homes and deliver food to an entire city. But that walker would abstract or simulate what it was like for essentially people to try and reach that marketplace and buy food. Now, going back to Anno, it is one of the best and, in another confusing sense, worst cases when it comes to mechanical gameplay. Because like we've said, I can put down 10,000 buildings or 10,000 homes in Anno World, and they will just do nothing. They will only react to what I am doing. And at some point, though, they become stable, and then I could just leave them alone. They will not do anything other than just give me a constant revenue stream. And that is a major point about mechanical gameplay, or that repetition, when it comes to city builders. Is that how do you keep the player engaged when everything is just simply revolving around the same basic elements? With Anno, there are a ton of resources and things to build, but it all falls along the same lines. Building a mine to mine out copper for weapons is the same gameplay loop as if I was building a grape farm to get grapes to turn into wine. And to be fair to Anno, this is not a case of us saying that Anno is bad. We're just trying to talk about some of the design challenges of it. But Anno is really, like we said earlier, about the logistical challenge. So here's an example. I want to serve high quality steaks to my elite citizens. I build a farm for cows. It will pump out a rate of 1.3 cows, yes, we're using decimal points, every 3 seconds. Those cows need to go to a slaughterhouse to be turned into meat. Again, we all know how that's going to work. The slaughterhouse will create 1 point of meat every 3 seconds for every 2.5 units of cows that go to it. But we're not done yet. In order to get turned into a high quality steak, we need to get that meat to let's say a fancy 5-star restaurant. And that 5-star restaurant will create 2 steaks based on having 3.4 pieces of meat every 5 seconds. Also, for those of you watching this right now, all those numbers are just hypotheticals. I am not the numbers guy here. But the whole challenge of the game is trying to figure out how to get all these various buildings and their known variables in alignment. So you're not really reacting. You're essentially trying to build a complicated machine where everything works, all the resources get to where they need to be, and you're still in the black. And the Anno franchise, and by extension City Builders, aren't really about depth for the most part. They're about scale. So you've built a sustainable city with 100 people. Okay, now do it with 500. Now do it with 1,000. Now 10,000. Now 500,000. Now 3 million. And you just keep going and growing. Now, for some of you watching this right now, what I just described either sounds very interesting to you, or you've pretty much fallen asleep at your computer. In that case, the subliminal messages will start appearing to get you to buy my book. But Anno, and by extension City Builders, have always ran into this challenge when it comes to providing long-term replayability. Because like we said, you're not reacting to the gameplay. You're essentially trying to figure out a puzzle. And once you figure that out, you can repeat that on the next map, on the next map, and again until you've either completely filled out the continent, you've made more money than you could ever spend, or you've gotten bored and you left. And there have been different ways of trying to change or make things harder on the player in terms of reaching that point of mastery. Now, in a few minutes, we're going to switch to some gameplay footage from one of the Anno games, but there's 2 other points I want to touch on before we do that. The first thing is, as we said earlier in this part, City Builders will always or will try to simulate one aspect when it comes to living, working, or keeping a city's infrastructure going. And that's important to understand, because has not been a city builder to this day, at least not at the extreme scale that we'll talk about in a second, that has gone for this level of detail. As in, I'm going to simulate, person gets up at 7 o'clock in the morning, they drive to work, they work from 9 to 5, they drive back home, oh wait, they need to go to the supermarket to buy food. They buy the food, the money gets processed by the supermarket or by the commercial zone, the person drives home, they eat the food, they go to the bathroom, they use water and electricity, they go to sleep, they get up again at 7 o'clock, and their day will repeat, and maybe they'll do something else different. And the reason why is very obvious. There has not been a computer or hardware yet able to simulate things at that level of detail for a high number of people. You could do this with maybe 10 people, 15? I don't know, I'm not the programmer guy. But I do know, though, that doing it for a city of 500,000 people is not going to work. We're probably talking next, maybe even another next gen in terms of hardware, until computers can properly simulate all that stuff. With Children of the Nile by Tilted Mill, they were able to simulate things at a far greater level of detail by making sure that your cities were kept on the small scale. If I remember right, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I think there was maybe 200 to 300 max people that could possibly fit. I know you didn't go for 10,000, 100,000, things like that, which again in an Anno game you can do that because you're not simulating all those people. Now, the other point, and this is one that I really want to ask everybody watching about, is that when Anno went to the future with 2205, they did something very unique in terms of their structure. What they did was, instead of trying to add complexity or growth to the gameplay, they turned the game into essentially an open world challenge. You had 3 different biomes, 4th if you bought the expansion, all with their own considerations, resources, buildings, and an economy, and you had to figure out how to not only balance and sustain one individual region, but then how those resources and goods would be transferred to another region, to be worked on to be sent to another region, and it just became this multi-layer logistical challenge. I also really enjoyed what they did with combat by turning it into a mini-game, or into a sub-game, I guess I should say, and allowing you to be rewarded or not, and you weren't punished for doing it. But if anyone knows of a city builder that went for that kind of design, let me know in the comments, because I want to play that game. But it's time to switch to some footage of one of the more popular Annos. We're going to talk about more of the design, and also about a game that tried to do things differently, which unfortunately I literally cannot play this game legally anymore. And that's always fun to talk about. But first, a quick word to our Patreon backers. Thank you to our Patreon backers, and if you'd like to continue this discussion on game design, be sure to check out our Discord channel, linked down below. Alright, so this is footage from Anno 1404, or what it's called in the United States, Dawn of Discovery. What Ubisoft tried to do was to make the game be more appealing over here. They changed the name, I guess, to try and confuse people so that they weren't just buying a logistics game of Anno. Unfortunately, I don't think it worked out, but be that as it may, 1404 is considered to be one of the best games in the Anno franchise, really capitalizing on a lot of the strengths of its mechanical style gameplay. Part of it was thanks to an extensive list of campaigns or scenarios for the player to deal with. So instead of you just building on a free map and nothing else happens, it's all just like this preserved area, you could turn on various events, you can have various challenges to deal with. Pirates attacking, volcanoes, plagues, you name it. And each campaign or each scenario would earn you an achievement. And the achievements in the game would unlock additional cosmetic items, additional buildings and flavor things you can put down, things along those lines. And the beauty of 1404 was that instead of, I guess, trying to fit a square peg into a round hole in terms of the actual gameplay loop, Blue Byte just embraced the mechanical nature of the game and designed everything else around it to add replayability and depth. You could see something similar with one of their later entries. I think it was, I want to say 2114. I'm confusing my numbers here, but it was the first Anno game that took place in the future. That one had different factions you could build with, as well as kind of a voting system where people would decide on what benefits would happen over the course of playing the game in kind of like a persistent element or a persistent metagame. But with 1404 here, one of the reasons why I'm using this footage and not the layer games is that right now they are Blue Byte is getting ready to release their latest game, Anno 1800. I believe it's been delayed to April. And 1404, I think, is going to kind of be the benchmark that a lot of people are going to hold 1800 to in terms of its design and structure. I don't think it's going to have the open-ended style from 2205, which is a shame. But while this footage is peacefully being, or nice peaceful footage is being played here, I want to bring up the example that I mentioned at the end of the last part, of a game that tried to do something differently that I legally cannot play anymore. And that is SimCity Societies, which, don't say that 10 times fast, people. But SimCity Societies was developed by Tilden Mill, and again, their background includes working on the Impressions era city builders, Children of the Nile, and one of my favorite underrated games, Hinterland. But SimCity Societies, when it was released, was hated. A lot of hardcore SimCity fans just downvoted and negatively reviewed that game. They felt it was a betrayal of the franchise. And the reason was due to their change in design and progression. So, what they did was you still manage your residential, commercial, industrial zones. You had to make sure your city was in the black. But instead of just having everything static, what Tilden Mill did was have two kinds of buildings. You have your general ones, your homes, industry, shops, things along those lines. And then you had buildings that were essentially categorized by a different societal trait. So you could build, let's say, a haunted house, and it would give you spooky points. You could build a stock market, and that would give you capitalism points, and so on and so forth. And what happened was, as you added these buildings, not only did they have their own requirements and things for you to balance and make them work, but they would push your city towards these different societal natures, which in turn would unlock more buildings within that respective one. So I think there was like a police state one, there was a cyberpunk dystopian future, there was a Candyland one, if you would believe it. And again, the basic gameplay loop of SimCity Societies, as with Anno, was fixed. And again, it's not about progression, but about scale. So to add in replayability and challenge, Tilden Mill put all that on the achievement system. As you unlock various buildings and content, it would give you more challenges to achieve, which will unlock more achievements and so on. And so instead of you just building your perfect city and calling it a day, the game wanted to challenge you in various aspects. So one could be, have a bank account of $500,000, but you cannot build any capitalism buildings to get there. Or have a city happiness above 90%, but you're building nothing but police state buildings. And you get the picture. And again, like with 1404 here, the replayability was kind of built outside of the core gameplay loop. And like I said, unfortunately, a lot of people when this game came out hated that redesign. But in a way, it almost felt like Tilden Mill was like 5 to 10 years ahead of the curve. Because like we've said, the problem that a lot of city builders have is how mechanical they are to play. Once I've built my perfect city, why should I build anything else? Because the same structure and foundation will work on one map as it will to the next, to the next, to the next, and so on. City Skylines, despite loving the UI of that game, it really is a great example of a dynamic UI. I just got really bored of that game after building like 2 or 3 cities. Now, with the one caveat that I did not play the game with all the additional expansion content that was thrown in. But I'm going to throw it to you folks with 2 questions. The first one is, for Anno fans, what did you think of the changes to the formula that were made with the futuristic ones? And are you excited about returning to the Age of Sail with 1800? And the other design question is it possible to introduce randomization or reactive gameplay to a city building structure? And if you do that, would it still be considered a city builder? For those of you who follow the independent scene, you probably have noticed I didn't mention the game Banished. Banished is another city builder that went in a completely different direction, and it's one that a lot of people call it like the roguelike or the Dark Souls of city builders. And at some point we need to spend, I think, a little closer or a little bit more time on that one. But we're going to wrap up this piece here for today. So thank you so much for watching, and thank you to the fans for talking about this on our Discord channel. Again, be sure to join if you'd like to continue this discussion, and check back for daily discussions on game design here, and on game wisdom, where examine the art and science of games. Until next time, have a great night. If you're looking for another book about game design, be sure to check out my first title, 20 Essential Games to Study, out now. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed things, be sure to do all the liking and subscribing that the kids are doing these days. Check out our Discord channel link down below where we hang out and chat game design, and come back later tonight for our regular streamings. But that's it, and tune in for more great content here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games.